Hello everybody, welcome to the second to last day of Sound Design September. Today I have a really cool sound for you guys. This is a little bit more of a complex one, but I think you'll like the idea that I have here. I know it really doesn't work on this kick and bass, but I do like these kind of melodic synths from time to time in my tracks. And as you can see, this one is made out of two different layers. First, I want to go quickly into the MIDI because it's based on this really cool polymeter or polyrhythm pattern. I don't really know what the difference is, but to be honest, I don't even find that important. What is really important is that we just have this kind of rising idea over here. That is 1/4 dotted notes. And then that just duplicates over for exactly 4 bars. After which it repeats. So you can see that this last note would be duplicated over, but we need to delete that. And then after that, as you can imagine, you just take your 4 bars and duplicate that over 3 more times. So as you can probably already see from just the setup of the synth, this is a little bit more advanced than I normally like to do. Most of the time when it comes to my productions, I use a lot of sounds and therefore I need to make my sounds fast. Otherwise I would be spending way too much time on my productions. But every once in a while, it is nice to just sit down and sound design something like this for a couple of minutes. And I say a couple of minutes because I believe both of these took about like 10 minutes to make. So it's not like overly complex. It is just still a synth patch without any processing and without any of that stuff. As you can imagine, in an actual production, if I were to do a little bit more processing and a little bit more work on the transitions and all of that kind of stuff, I would spend even more time on it. But it is actually fairly rare for me to spend like 10 full minutes on a sound design patch. Usually because before I go sound designing for a particular sound, I already have in mind what I want. So it is pretty easy for me to get there nowadays. So usually it would take me like 2-3 minutes to get just the patch down, and then let's say another 10 to 15 minutes for all of the processing and the transitions, the other stuff that actually puts it in the production. And that is for most of the sounds the amount of time that I would actually spend on the sound design. But as I said, this one is a little bit more complex. The real reason for that is because I wanted to get a little bit of extra movement, a little bit of extra character into the sound. For one, we're doing some tricks where we're emulating a little bit of analogness, in the sense that we're doing some stuff with the fine tuning and we're using these fairly specific wavetables over here, which in this case we're also remapping, and you can see that we're also modulating the wavetable position over here. So the whole goal of this patch is just to generate a warm, plucky sound, but the pluckiness of the sound is changing over time, which is, I believe, modulated by this LFO over here, yes. As you can see, this goes through the whole 16 bars of our phrase here, so that would be the whole time that it plays. And it's just upping the attack every once in a while to get away from that pluckiness and to get a little bit of a slide in. And this LFO is what is responsible for the main movement of the sound, the main pluckiness, which is achieved through the wavetail position, the remap, and then mainly the filter cutoff over here. But as you can see, we also have this LFO2 here, which has a whole bunch of different destinations that it goes to, mainly on the effects page over here. You can see that we have the hyper coming in over time, we have the dimension increasing in size and in mix over time, we have the distortion coming up over time, we have this flanger coming in over time, and then we have the delay kind of morphing out, whereas the reverb is coming in, so we have the delay kind of replacing the reverb here. And you can see that we're also getting a longer decay time, which is that pumping effect that you hear. So overall, you can probably tell that this patch isn't really all that complex if you just look at the essence of it. It is more that all of the details are complex, and that is really what matters. As you can see, I'm using a slight bit of phaser, I'm using a slight bit of chorus, I'm using that bit of flanger, which is increasing over time. We're of course distorting it and changing the hyper and dimension over time as well, so there's that nice detail of just sounds changing over time. And this is that 2-bar modulation that you hear, that 2-bar kind of like fading in that you hear in these sounds. So this is just the first one. It's mainly the effect of the reverb that you hear kind of coming up over time. As I said before, another cool thing that we're doing is emulating a little bit of analogness by changing the fine tuning as well as the panning actually over here. And the way that we're doing that, if I scroll down to the note on randoms here, is that we're using the note on random to bipolarly modulate all 4 of these parameters. So you can see 20 modulation on the fine tuning and 40 modulation on the panning. And this is just again a small effect. It isn't going to really sound out of tune with just 20% modulation. and it's not really going to sound out of the stereo field with just 40% modulation. It is just that every once in a while a note is going to sound a little bit more left, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, a little bit more to the right, and that is a nice detail that keeps the melody a little bit more fresh. The last thing that is happening over here is that we have this module, which is just responsible for the filtering, which is just opening up over time. So you can see even here in essence, it is not complex because we're using some kind of complex modulation or complex setup or whatever. It is just opening up over time, but there are so many layers upon layers in terms of the details with the oscillators that we're using, in terms of the filter that is moving up in two different ways. Of course, over here with the pluckiness, which is being altered by the shape over here. So where the filter is at its highest point within the note is constantly changing because the attack is changing. And then of course we've also all of the details that are being added by the effects, which are again always changing because we have this 2-bar modulation here. So this is where I could have left it. This is where I could have just left the patch and then it would have sounded nice. So if I turn off the second patch, you can hear this still works in terms of musical idea. You might want to turn it up by 2 or 3 dB so that it fits a little bit better in the mix. But as you can imagine, if you layer another sound on top of that, you want to turn it down a little bit to compensate. And the sound that we layered on top of that sounds somewhat like this. And as you can see, this is a vital patch. You can actually hear it a little bit in the way that just the sound sounds. It sounds a little bit more lusher. It sounds a little bit less like precise in the way that it's synthesized. And that is sometimes a quality that I really want out of a sound. So that is when I switch to vital. And in this case, what I decided to do is I decided to use some of these factory wavetables that aren't just your basic shapes. So usually I would use the basic shape saw wave or some of the other waveforms in here to make interesting FM setups or something like that. But for a plug like this, I wanted to do something different. So as you can see, we have blended these 3 basically saw-based waveforms into each other. And then, of course, we've set different levels, different octaves. We have set different amount of voices, different amount of detune. And this is really where you get to dial in the texture of the plugs that you're creating. As you can see, again, it's going through a filter, which is being modulated by this envelope over here. This is the modulation. It is also modulating some other stuff, like the wavetable over here, and this wavetable over here, and this one as well. So it's doing all 3 of the wavetables. It is also responsible for modulation on the soft clipper over here so that it just gets a little bit of extra volume. And then you can see we have the same idea with the attack being modulated over 16 bars. In this case, we're also modulating the attack of the first envelope. Then in order to keep this layer a little bit more interesting, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a little bit more of movement coming from the filter. So you can see that the filter cutoff is also being modulated over here. And I believe that means that there's another filter. This is going to be the main filter that will be opening up, and that will be responsible for increasing the energy over time. Then the next LFO is our equivalent to LFO2 that we saw in the other one. You can see 2/1, so 2 bars. And this is again linked to a whole bunch of different effects. It goes to this middle band over here so that it increases the mid-range over time. It then also goes to 3 parameters of the EQ. I believe somewhere here on the band. Yeah, so on the middle band. You can see that it opens up the band. This should be like this. And you can see that the gain is increasing, the cutoff is increasing, and the resonance is decreasing. So we get this kind of opening up bell shape. And you can hear that that nicely starts to drive it into the distortion here. Then the final 2 parameters that are being modulated over here are on the reverb. So that would be the mix as well as the time over here. As you can see, the time goes up very far, much further than you would normally want, but that is just so that we kind of have just a sustained reverb towards the end here. And of course, once the modulation shuts again, that reverbing sound is also cut off. The final modulation that we have over here is a little bit more of a control one. We are increasing the amount of high frequencies, and then we're also increasing the volume. That is really so that towards the end here, we get a little bit more of a breathing sound. If I just put it up, you can hear that it's really not dynamic enough as a layer. Because what is cool with these kind of layer sounds is to sometimes like slightly introduce a texture or just to layer on a very specific part. In this case, that is what this LFO is doing. It is just making sure that at the beginning, the other sound can come through a little bit more. And that is also an idea that we can explore in more detail as we make another one of these patches. Now do keep in mind that if you don't want to create these patches from scratch because they're a little bit more complex, you can find them over up on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in that, then definitely go check it out because it's also an amazing way to support the channel and you get some amazing patches in return. So let's start from scratch here. And actually what I want to do is I want to have a lot of complex movement in here. And usually what I do when I want a lot of complexity is I actually go for phase plant. So what we could maybe try is starting off with a few analogs over here just to have a little bit of stability in there. So let's layer 2 of them an octave apart, like so. We have given them a little bit of unison. We want to spread them in the stereo fields. I always know that the default amount of unison is way too much for the sounds that I want to go for. Let me just quickly copy over the MIDI because that is going to make things much easier. This is editor projector. This may be a little bit embarrassing, but during the recording process, I took some sulfur hexafluoride. So that's why this next bit, my voice is a little bit deeper.
That is a nice start. Let's add our filter. That is going to be the main plucking movement here. So we're going to create an envelope for that. We'll have no attack. We'll lower the sustain like this. Going to give it a nicer shape. This like that. And give it a little bit of release. Then it's going to tend down like that. I'll also give the patch itself a little bit of release and sustain. So that this also becomes a little bit more plucky. And then this is just going to go to the filter. Like so, almost up to like 15 kilohertz there.
And of course, what we could do is set up our modulation for the attack here, if we want to do something similar. Now, there's several different ways that we can do that. We can combine different modulations and stuff like that. But what I'm just going to do is set it to sync over here. And then I want to go 16 bars. So that should put this at 64 here. And then we can just draw in the shape that moves up and down. I believe this is the easiest way to do it, yeah. Just kind of a random curve here. Trying to get as much detail as possible in it. And I will set this to the attack over here. Have it go up to maybe like 60 milliseconds on both. In this case, what we need to do is we need to go into these settings over here. And then note retrigger, never retrigger from notes. And now it should be synced to our project. I don't know if there's an actual way to retrigger this curve in sync with the project. But to be honest, that doesn't really matter. Because at the end of the day, all we need is for it to change. And I've just set it to like the infinite mode here so that it's just infinitely going to loop. And that is just going to change the attack over time seemingly randomly. And that is really all that we need. So now let's add a little bit of detail to this by adding something like a granular synthesizer. I'm just going to go for some random sounds in here just to see if we can get some interesting textures. This seems to be a little bit too harmonic here. I just want an individual sound, I guess. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get something like that in tune. Maybe a vocal is a little bit nicer. Probably some interesting things that we can do there if we maybe modulate the volume. So we'll have this level go from 0 to 100. Can change the random position so that it just can re-trigger wherever it wants to. As you can see, there's a lot of experimentation happening and it's just a lot of listening. That is what you want with these kind of details. I think what we'll do is we'll have like 2 stages of reverb where we're going to reverb this pluck a little bit more than this sound over here. So what I've done is I've set this to lane 1 and this to lane 2. So we can set that up by using the convolver over here for our reverb. Let's just choose a random space here. Okay, that's already cool. And then I'll add our delay as well. So let's set it synced and let's keep the delay time the same as the other patches. And then we'll set it to the panning all the way to the right and bounce so that we get a nice ping pong delay. Maybe a little bit more reverb on the totality here. Just a smaller one. Already found a nice parameter to automate over time. So that is what I'm going to set up next. It's going to be the LFO that is going to be opening up over the 2 bars. Keep in mind that this is going to be a layer. So we do want to keep basically everything very closely related to each other. So this layer over here can just modulate up like this. Again, we should have this on never re-trigger from the note. What we can also do is a similar trick here where the mix is going to go down and the reverb is going to go up in synchronous here. What might be cool is if we set up our filter modulation here to also set it up like this. So this is going to be our filter modulation that is going to automate in over time. So that is just going to go like the other ones, straight up like this. I really want a strong phaser effect on these vocals. So I'm just going to duplicate that over 3 times. As you can see, I'm just experimenting now and trying to find new ways of making the sound more interesting over time. It's unfortunate that this phaser doesn't really come with a feedback parameter. Then we could make those really strong kind of phaser textures. Maybe it is cool to pair it with a flanger on the other sound here. This does seem to come with a feedback control here. What could also be cool is to scoop out the mid-range. And you can do that with the slice EQ. Because if you just set up a high pass like this, and let's make that maybe 24 dB per octave, keep it at its lowest frequency, we have this offset over here that we can scoop up. And we can just slowly modulate it up over time a little bit. Let's start a little bit higher. And let's set this filter to a lot less steep, so that it lets some of the frequencies through, but towards the end really cut out the lowest part of the sound here. That is sounding very cool. What could also be cool is to do like a shimmer reverb effect. So what we can do, what I really want to try to do is use something like multipass here. Multipass is for multiband. I should use snap heap because there you can do parallel processing. You can turn these into parallel buses here. And we're just going to need 3 buses. One is going to be our dry signal. One is going to be pitched up an octave with the pitch shifter here. And then we'll have another one that is going to be just a pitch shifter with a reverb. And the reason why I do that is I both want to just have a little bit of a brighter sound in there, as well as have this reverb sound. Because what is cool is that we can actually set up input gains for these. So let's close those out and just get the gain here, here, and here. And then we can write modulations in for them. So I'm just creating a basic shape using this option over here. And I believe we have 16 over here, which should be enough for 2 bars. So let's set this to 2 bars, like so. And now we can assign this to the middle gain, for example, by going 50%. And starting from -30, it will go up to the highest point here. And we can do a similar thing for this one over here, just changing some of the modulation around here so that we get a different pattern. And we'll set that up on this gain over here. So again, to 50% exactly, so that it goes back up to 0 dB. That means that most of the time this is going to be lower in volume. So we can compensate a little bit by just generally raising it up a little bit, or even by turning this down a little bit if we want to. And as you can see, this is now really giving us our high texture that we want. I am going to put this before the delay and reverb because I don't like how it interacts with the delay and reverb. So now we get something like this. And this one mixed in on top of our other sounds is going to sound somewhat like this. So that's it. That is how you make complex synth sounds. As you can see, the runtime of this video is a little bit longer. I've been recording for around 40 minutes here. And that is just because you need to experiment a lot when you're doing this kind of stuff. That may also be the reason why the last patch I didn't explain everything that I did. I'll try in the edit to keep most of it in, but there are just some parts where it becomes really boring and I'm not really explaining what I'm doing, so it doesn't really make sense to keep that in. Because at the end of the day, it is not about with these patches that you guys just follow step by step along with what I do. Of course, if you want to get the patches exactly as I have them, then you can do it like that. But in that case, I would say just go to the Patreon. There you can just get them. Instead, my goal is to more focus on all of the possibilities that you have and all of the different things that you can do. As you can see, there's tons of different synths that you can use for this. We've used Serum, we've used Vital, and we've used Faceband. And all of them are going to get you different tonalities and different parts of a more layered sound even. In this case, we've layered up all three, which is giving us a really interesting idea. So as you can imagine, there's tons of different things that you can do in this department, and hopefully you find some interesting sounds along the way. So that's going to be it for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and making sure that you're subscribed. Another way to support the channel is by watching some more of my content, so I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.